This is Logan Blackwood, reporting for International Desk. On Friday, the world got the news it had been waiting for. Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz open. Oil prices fell more than 10% in a single day. Markets surged. Leaders exhaled. For one brief moment, the worst energy crisis in modern history appeared to be over. By Saturday morning, Iranian gunboats were firing on tankers again. By Sunday, the strait was closed. 2 ships had been seized. A cargo vessel was taking on water. And oil, which had just fallen below $91 a barrel, was climbing back toward $100. The world had its exit ramp. Iran took it away within 48 hours. And what is happening right now inside that 21-mile stretch of water is not just a military standoff. It is a direct attack on the energy infrastructure that keeps the global economy alive. It is the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the world. And it is getting worse, not better. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what Iran did after declaring Hormuz open, how it reopened the strait with one hand and seized ships with the other, why the US blockade and Iran's counter-strategy have created a deadlock that neither side can easily break, and what happens to oil prices, inflation, and global stability if this waterway stays functionally closed through the summer. Stay with me, because the full picture here is far more serious than what you're seeing in the headlines. Think of the human body for a moment. Your heart pumps blood through a network of arteries to every organ, every muscle, every cell. As long as blood flows, the body functions. When an artery gets blocked, partially, suddenly, without warning, organs begin to fail. The longer the blockage holds, the more permanent the damage becomes. Now scale that up to the size of the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz is the main artery. Every single day, before this war began, roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil passed through that 21-mile-wide channel. That is 25% of the world's entire seaborne oil trade. China gets a third of its oil through that strait. Europe gets 12 to 14% of its liquefied natural gas from Qatar through that strait. Japan, South Korea, India, the entire industrial base of Asia, their energy supply flows through that strait. Up to 30% of the world's internationally traded fertilizers, the inputs that feed the global food supply, transit through that strait. When Iran closes it, the artery blocks. And it has now been functionally blocked since February 28th. That is 54 days. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, has called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. The head of the IEA called it the greatest global energy security challenge in history. And last weekend, when the world thought the blockage was finally clearing, Iran showed exactly how much control it still has over that artery. Here is the precise sequence of events, because the details matter enormously. On Thursday, April 17th, Iran's foreign minister declared the Strait of Hormuz fully open to commercial traffic. The announcement sent Brent crude falling more than 10%, below $91 a barrel for the first time since March 10th. Ship tracking data showed a significant increase in vessels attempting to cross. Maritime analysts described it as the busiest the strait had looked since the war began. Then, on Saturday, within 24 hours of the opening, Iranian Revolutionary Guard gunboats fired on a tanker in the strait. The UK's Maritime Trade Operations Centre confirmed the incident. India's foreign ministry summoned Iran's ambassador after 2 Indian-flagged vessels came under fire. Audio captured from maritime monitoring systems recorded a crew member transmitting a live distress call, telling Iranian naval forces they had been given clearance and were now being shot at. And here's where it gets worse. On Sunday, the USS Spruance, a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer, intercepted an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel called the Tuska in the Gulf of Oman. After 6 hours of ignored warnings, the Navy fired on the ship's engine room, disabled it, and sent U.S. Marines aboard to seize it. Trump announced it personally on Truth Social, saying Iran had fired bullets in the Strait of Hormuz. A total violation, he wrote, of the ceasefire agreement. Iran's response was immediate. Its chief negotiator and parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, went on Iranian state television and stated, unequivocally, that reopening the Strait of Hormuz is impossible as long as the U.S. blockade remains in place. His exact words, "It is impossible for others to pass through the Strait of Hormuz while we cannot." Iran's National Security Council then released a formal statement declaring that Iran is determined to exercise supervision and control over traffic through the strait until the war is definitively ended and lasting peace is achieved in the region. This is not a temporary measure. This is a declared policy. But here's where it gets worse. On Wednesday, just this week, Iran attacked 3 more commercial ships in the strait. The IRGC seized 2 container vessels, the MSC Francesca, and the Epaminondas. A third ship, the Euphoria, was attacked by the Iranian Navy. A gunboat fired on a container ship on Tuesday, causing heavy damage to its bridge. Another cargo ship was hit on Wednesday and stopped dead in the water. This happened on the same day Trump extended the ceasefire. The same day the UK and France opened a conference of 50 nations in London to discuss a plan to reopen the waterway. Iran's response to the ceasefire extension, in the words of a senior Iranian official, was that it means nothing. Let's go through the receipts. Receipt number 1, what Iran is actually doing and why it is strategically calculated. Iran has launched 21 confirmed attacks on merchant ships since the war began. It has reportedly laid sea mines in sections of the strait, a violation, according to legal analysts, of both the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the Hague Convention. The IRGC is not randomly firing on ships. It is enforcing a deliberate policy. If Iran cannot move its own vessels freely under the US blockade, then no vessel moves freely through Hormuz. The result is that war risk insurance premiums for tankers attempting to transit have surged to levels that make the crossing commercially unviable for most operators. Major shipping firms have suspended operations entirely. Before the war, more than 100 vessels crossed the strait daily. As of this week, that number is a tiny fraction of what it was, with the few ships that do attempt to cross doing so under extraordinary risk. And what most people are missing is this. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the assassinated Ayatollah, is seen by analysts as significantly more hardline than his father, with deep ties to the Revolutionary Guard. The people now making decisions about Hormuz are not moderates looking for an off-ramp. They are IRGC-aligned hardliners who view the blockade as an existential threat and are responding accordingly. Receipt number 2. What this has done to global oil markets and what it is doing to ordinary people right now. Brent crude surged more than 55% from the moment the war began, jumping from around $72 a barrel on February 27th to nearly $120 at its peak. March recorded one of the largest single-month oil price jumps in recorded history, with Brent gaining 51% in 30 days. Global oil supply plummeted by more than 10 million barrels per day in March alone, the largest supply drop ever recorded. The IEA has cut runs at Middle Eastern and Asian refineries by around 6 million barrels per day. U.S. gas prices have risen $1.16 per gallon since the start of the war. Analysts warned that if Hormuz is not reopened, prices could hit $5 a gallon. In the UK, Shell's CEO warned that Europe could face fuel shortages by April, and that warning has now been validated. British supermarket chain Asda reported fuel station shortages. Germany announced emergency tax cuts on petrol and diesel. A poll in the UK found 1 in 10 people are already stockpiling fuel. LNG prices in Japan and South Korea are up 48%. Jet fuel costs have more than doubled in some markets. The International Air Transport Association warned that even after Hormuz reopens, the recovery in jet fuel supply could take months due to refinery constraints. In Zimbabwe, the government scrapped fuel import taxes and increased ethanol content in petrol to 20% just to keep vehicles running. In South Sudan, a country that generates 96% of its electricity from oil, rolling power cuts have already begun. This is a global crisis. It is not contained to the Persian Gulf. Receipt number 3, the international response and why Wednesday's conference may be the last realistic diplomatic window. On Wednesday, military planners from more than 30 nations gathered at a Royal Air Force base north of London, hosted by the UK and France, to design a multinational mission to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The challenges are immense. Iranian sea mines must be identified and cleared. Iranian gunboats must be deterred. Rules of engagement for a defensive maritime mission must be agreed upon by dozens of governments with different risk tolerances and political constraints. China's President Xi Jinping called Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman personally to demand Hormuz remain open, stating that free navigation is in the common interest of regional countries and the international community. India has urged Iran directly to allow its ships safe passage. The U.S. has forced 23 vessels to turn around as part of its blockade, while simultaneously trying to negotiate a peace deal through Pakistan. And this is where everything changes, because the U.S. and Iran are now locked in a structural contradiction. The U.S. blockade prevents Iran from exporting oil, costing Tehran, according to Trump's own public statements, $500 million a day. Iran's response is to make the strait unusable for everyone else. The US cannot lift the blockade without abandoning its leverage. Iran cannot reopen the strait without conceding the blockade has worked. Neither side has an easy path to de-escalation, and the longer this holds, the more the global economy absorbs damage that cannot simply be undone when a deal is eventually reached. Because here's the final piece of this picture. Even if Hormuz opened tomorrow, fully, completely, and safely, the recovery would not be immediate. Rystad Energy estimates it will take until July for oil flows to reach 90% of pre-war levels. Then another 2 months after that for barrels to reach refineries and be processed into usable products. The IEA projects global crude runs will decline by 1 million barrels per day for all of 2026. Analysts project Brent will anchor in the $80 to $90 range, not returning to pre-crisis levels, even in the optimistic scenario. We are living through a supply shock that will shape energy prices, inflation, and economic growth for the rest of this year, regardless of what happens next. And what happens next is genuinely uncertain. Peace talks in Pakistan are stalled. The ceasefire extension that Trump announced was met with ship seizures. The multilateral conference in London has not yet produced a mission, let alone a deployment. Iran's new leadership is more hardline than what came before, and the waterway that feeds 1/5 of the world's oil supply remains, as of today, functionally closed. If this is connecting dots you haven't seen anywhere else, subscribe to International Desk right now. Hit the bell, because this story is moving every single day, and you need to be here when the next development breaks. Here is where we stand. Iran declared Hormuz open, then seized ships, then declared reopening impossible. A UK-France conference of 50 nations is trying to build a multinational mission to force the waterway open. Oil has surged more than 55% since this war began. 20,000 sailors are stranded, fuel shortages are hitting Europe, gas prices in America are approaching $5. And two militaries, one enforcing a blockade, one enforcing closure, are operating in the same 21-mile channel with no agreement and no clear path forward. The world's main energy artery has been blocked for 54 days. Every additional day it stays blocked, the damage compounds. And every attempt to reopen it, diplomatic, military, or economic, has so far failed. I'm Logan Blackwood. This has been International Desk, and this might only be the beginning.